Hello, and welcome to Temple of the False Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce!
That's Bruce.
That's Andy.
Welcome to today's episode. You know, we usually do this on episode 8, but because of MagicCon Philly, we pushed everything a week. And now this is episode 9, which means we have a little bit of a discussion to have during our break, which we'll get to. But today's episode is a deck tale.
Ooh! Ooh! There we go.
Oh, that felt good.
So, Andy, the question I have for you is, who's the commander on for today?
The commander on for today is the Mimeoplasm, one of the original commanders.
Ooh.
Mimeoplasm was originally printed in the original cycle of the first pre-cons for Commander,
Right.
by Wizards of the Coast, and it is an ooze. It's a 0/0. I'll just read the card now. It's a 0/0, blue, green, black 2 for legendary creature ooze. As the Mimeoplasm enters the battlefield, you may exile 2 creature cards from graveyards. If you do, it enters the battlefield as a copy of one of those, and as a copy is what.
You're killing me here.
I'm killing myself.
It enters the battlefield as a copy of one of those creatures with a number of additional +1/+1 counters equal to the power of the other card.
Great.
So essentially, we're taking 2 cards, squishing them together, and we're getting
monster mash.
Something good. Yes.
It's a big old squish.
Yes.
So, not unlike Griselda, this sees 2 cards in a graveyard, but it exiles them. You make a copy of one, you look at the power of the other. Yeah, so it wants to do 2 things. It wants to see big creatures, and it wants to see interesting text boxes.
Right.
That's it. So the idea behind this deck is to fill everyone's graveyard.
Right.
As you can tell, this deck does not, or this card does not specifically say your graveyard, so you can go after anybody's creatures, and it's excellent.
Right.
So the biggest thing with this deck is if you're not feeling the cards in your graveyard, look elsewhere and see if that helps.
All right. So, what do you have in the deck that fills graveyards?
I have so many things. I've got 6 things. I've got probably more than 6. But there's so many overlaps in these categories, you'll see. So I've got Altar of Dementia. Altar of Dementia is a beautiful, beautiful masterpiece because you have big creatures. That's what this deck does. It makes big creatures. It makes Mimeoplasm a big creature. It makes, a bunch of oozes as well that will eventually be big. You sack it to the Altar of Dementia, and then you can choose anyone at the table, including yourself, because that's the point of the deck, is to fill graveyards, not necessarily for milling purposes, but to fuel the commander. And this is especially excellent when you're facing a board wrath, because you can do all of this at instant speed.
Right. I guess my big question is, as someone who loves Altar of Dementia, and I run it in one of my 60-card casual decks to great effect, but do you find yourself targeting yourself, I guess, more often than opponents, just because so many people seem to like to have cards in their graveyard nowadays?
Yeah.
Are you like gifting them with cards in their graveyard?
I think it depends. I mean, it's always a situational basis.
Right.
I think that fairly enough, like if you see that somebody is intentionally doing graveyard shenanigans, then don't target them generally, unless you think that you can take them out pretty quickly. But I think because I know what's in my own deck,
right.
Unless somebody is serious about big creatures, like say somebody's playing mono green, like mill them by all means.
Mm-hmm.
Because like the thing with the Mimeoplasm that I like the most is that it can see those threats within somebody's deck. You know, it goes to the graveyard. Maybe they're planning on taking it out. You play the Mimeoplasm, it exiles the card.
Right.
And even when the Mimeoplasm dies, it's not like it goes back to the graveyard. It's just gone.
Right.
Which is fantastic for removing those threats.
Absolutely. And you talk about removing the threat. I love running this because it really discourages your opponents or opponents who are running Sensei's Divining Top, Brainstorm, any card that searches for a card and puts it on top of your library.
Yeah.
Because this goes off before they can activate the draw. And it is a beautiful thing. I have only managed to do it a couple of times, and obviously you're not going to run Altar of Dementia just to mess with the top of their library. But when you get the chance, glorious. I love it. Watching, the card they worked so hard to get onto the top of their library. It's like, no, graveyard. Try again. Work harder. And ideally, they're putting something really useful into their graveyard. Hopefully, a creature that you can then use and work it with the Mimeoplasm. So, it's just, I love Altar of Dementia. I mean, I realize there's some downside issues, but I mean, that's more a case of, just being careful with how things work as opposed to a problem with the altar itself. So,
yeah. Also in this category, I have Corpse Turn, which is a pretty sweet card from Commander Legends. It's for 1 and a black for an instant, which is always nice when something's an instant. You mill 3 cards and then you return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So if there's something that gets into your graveyard that you want out, it does do that recursion piece, but this is much more for just getting the 3 cards into your library or into your graveyard at instant speed. It's setting you up for end of turn, Corpse Turn, beginning of turn, play Mimeoplasm. And if Mimeoplasm gets to be, I don't know, prohibitively expensive, just leave the Mimeoplasm in the graveyard, Corpse Turn gets it right back out. So,
nice.
I'm going to skip over the next one. Rites of Spring. Discard any number of cards from your hand. Any cards. Probably creatures. Search your library for that many basic lands. Reveal those cards. Put them into your hand. This card doesn't see a lot of play for pretty obvious reasons. But if your goal is to fill your graveyard, then I don't see a problem here.
Right. No, this card, the issue that people have with it is that it's not ramp. Meaning it doesn't let you get an extra land out each turn. And that's what people are looking for from their ramp cards. What people underestimate is that this card guarantees you've got a land drop for however many turns you're going to do this for. I mean, you're not going to play Rites of Spring and discard 1 card.
Right.
You're probably discarding 3 cards. So, and then you're getting 3 lands. Well, for the next 3 turns, you're guaranteed a land drop. And you've already probably played 2 lands already, at least. So, you're looking at guaranteeing land drops for an extended period of time. Yes, it does not hurry things along, but it's still good that way. And in this deck, the discard is really what you want anyway. So there's no downside. This is 2 mana. Get the lands into your hand that you wanted there in the first place. Oh, and by the way, you can also dump those creatures that you wanted in the graveyard too.
Exactly.
And all that for the low price of 1 and a green. I mean,
yeah,
sounds great. Like,
honestly, playing this turn 2, getting all of those creatures in the graveyard, it really goes to show that mulliganing takes a little bit more practice with this deck. Like, if you see Rites of Spring in your deck, in your opening hand, and you have 2 lands or a land and a Soul Ring, then you're golden. Like, the other 4 cards, if you've got 2 lands or a land and a Soul Ring and then Rites of Spring, the other 4 cards you can probably just see like, oh, if I've got 2 7-drops and a 6-drop and a 4-drop, like you will be dumping those. It's fine,
right?
Because you'll be getting the land that you need. It's great. And if you're playing against people that will make you dump that hand, then you don't want to play with those people. Up next, I have Tomb Robber. Tomb Robber and Tortured Existence kind of do a similar thing, which is just you pay a mana to discard a card. Tomb Robber is a 1/1 for 3 with Menace. Tomb Robber, you pay 1, discard a card, and it explores. So you reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land, you put it in your hand. Otherwise, you put a +1/+1 counter on Tomb Robber, and then you surveil, essentially. It either goes, it stays on top or goes to your graveyard, which for 1 mana, you can get 2 creatures into the graveyard if you're fairly lucky. I mean, like, you don't really need much luck with that one.
No.
Tortured Existence is that line of recursion and fill your graveyard. It's a single black enchantment. For 1 black, choose and discard a creature card. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. It helps with recursion if Mimeoplasm gets prohibitively expensive, or Moltrotha gets into the graveyard and you want her, or, there's so many things that you can get back out of your graveyard, especially early game, because this only costs 1 and 1. So that's my... Oh, yeah. And then, of course, the piece de resistance, Fact or Fiction. 3 and a blue.
Right.
Draw 5 cards. I mean, you reveal top 5 cards, an opponent separates those into 2 piles. You pick one, and the other one goes to the graveyard. So either they're giving you big creatures that you can play, or they're putting big creatures into your graveyard, and you can play them. There's very little difference between the graveyard and hand, as this section has shown. I love it. I love Fact or Fiction.
Yeah.
Because it takes a lot of patience for your opponent to figure out what exactly do they want to give you. How do they split it up as evenly as possible is the thing.
When you look at the Mimeoplasm, arguably you could try and split it into 2 piles where you're getting creatures with text boxes or creatures with big power and toughness and break them up that way. But realistically, nobody's looking that deep at the Mimeoplasm and then trying to figure out their Fact or Fiction that way. And 2, honestly, even if they do, you got everybody else's graveyard. So, if they give you a bunch of big fatty creatures in your graveyard, well, you'll use that to get for your +1/+1 counter and use somebody else's card for the token, or vice versa, depending on how they decide to split things up. Yeah, there's no real downside to it. And since you're picking the pile, you can look what the opponents have in their graveyard and say, oh, he's already got a big fatty in the graveyard. I'll take the pile. I'll put the pile with all of the cool flavor text creatures into the graveyard. Now I can pick them and play the Mimeoplasm and go to town.
Yeah. And I think the thing there is, like, for as much as they will try to foil your plan of the Mimeoplasm, it's hard for them to control your graveyard plus everyone else's. I think the Mimeoplasm really just wants to have fun with the table.
Right. And Mimeoplasm is one of those cards that if somebody's somebody's graveyard gets Bajuka bogged, and that's generally what's happening here, there's still all the other ones to use.
Exactly.
So I mean, worst case scenario is that your graveyard gets hit, because then you're relying completely on your opponents. But honestly, you can probably get cards into your graveyard fairly quickly anyway. So
yeah,
I think you're going to be in good shape, even if there is some targeted graveyard hate in your game.
And generally speaking, there are 3 types of creatures I have in this deck.
Okay.
And 2 of them are generally types of creatures I want to just put directly into the graveyard, with the third kind of filling out the rest so that if I do get Bajuka bogged or nobody has a graveyard type of thing, I can still kind of stand on 2 feet, as it were. A thing that you had mentioned was text boxes.
Yes.
Big juicy text boxes.
Okay.
I've got a small selection here. I've got Galloping Lizrog, which is a 3/3 for 5, 3 blue green. Trample, when it enters the battlefield, you may remove any number of +1/+1 counters from among creatures you control. If you do, put twice that many on Galloping Lizrog. So it's got Trample. It now has it. For all of these examples, we're going to talk about it as if it's the Mimeoplasm.
Yeah.
It's got Trample. It's now got Commander damage. It starts as a 3/3, and you both put +1/+1 counters on it from the Mimeoplasm's text box, and then also from anything else on your board. It's excellent. We've got Gamekeeper, which is middle of the road. It's fine. It really kind of only matters when the creature, Mimeoplasm, is Gamekeeper and it dies. It says when Gamekeeper dies, you may exile it. If you do, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card onto the battlefield and all the other cards revealed this way into your graveyard. It fuels any sort of kind of recursion. Unfortunately, none of those cards that go into the graveyard are gonna be creatures. But it helps put out a blocker until you can get the Mimeoplasm back from the command zone. The Mimeoplasm as Grun the Lonely King. It's a 5/5. Whenever the Mimeoplasm as Grun attacks alone, double its power and toughness until end of turn.
All right.
Now, it does not have Trample or anything, but you're most likely going to have a huge amount of counters on it. So if it goes unblocked, then I don't know, like game over, I guess. Multani, Yavamaya's Avatar. I have this in a few of my decks, and this card is just sick. Like, it does work. It's a 0/0, which is not great, but it gets +1/+1 for each land you control and each land in your graveyard. So, we've talked about some milling stuff. You're going to have lands in your graveyard no matter what. Multani's just going to get bigger and bigger. The Mimeoplasm as Multani is going to get bigger and bigger with the additional +1 counters.
Right, and we talked about Rites of Spring. So knowing that Multani's there, when you cast your Rites of Spring and you're discarding cards, discard all your lands. Because you're just going to get that many more of them back, and now you've also got lands in your graveyard, which will only make Multani a little bigger. So, another bonus, another interaction between the cards.
And Multani's also got Reach and Trample. So if you make Mimeoplasm as Multani huge, you can get that commander damage in. It's great. Third line of text on Multani says, 1 and a green, return 2 lands you control to their owner's hand. Return Multani from your graveyard to your hand. So if you stumble upon this card late game, even if, you have Mimeoplasm out, or if Mimeoplasm it isn't even necessarily prohibitively expensive, you can always get Multani out of the graveyard as just another creature. A thing I try to keep in mind is that my only creature doesn't have to be the Mimeoplasm. I can have more creatures than that. The fact that Multani has Reach and Trample is really nice. The Reach is great for blocking. The Trample is nice for attacking. And if you exile it with the Mimeoplasm, you can't get it back. So keep that in mind. And then we've got everyone's favorite bearded friend, Uncle Istvan, who's black, 1 for a 1/3. And it says prevent all damage that would be dealt to Uncle Istvan by creatures. So nothing spectacular, but it's just like a little fun thing where if you are facing a board full of, I don't know, Death Touchers, Uncle Istvan will be fine. Mimeoplasm as Uncle Istvan.
Uncle Istvan does work. Number one, he's an excellent blocker. I realize Uncle Istvan only does 1 point of damage, but when somebody's swinging in with their big guy, Uncle Istvan is preventing all the damage. So it works out really well, and that also works out nicely in combat too, because people are just not interested in dealing with a whole lot in front of them. Now, if you take Uncle Istvan where his power is only 1, that's fine. But the Mimeoplasm is Uncle Istvan, the Mimeoplasm is going to have a bunch of +1/+1 counters on him. Suddenly, Uncle Istvan looks a whole lot more threatening.
For sure. And then along with those text boxes, you want big bodies, so you can get a lot of +1/+1 counters on Mimeoplasm. And this category overlaps with a lot of the other categories. A lot of these creatures have cool text boxes that you might want. So, like, there's a lot of flexibility with how you play your commander with this deck. Eryxmathes you can play as the 4-mana 12/12 that comes in with 5 slumber counters. It's a land. You can tap it for blue and a green. Or you can throw it in the graveyard and get 12 +1/+1 counters on it. We also have the next card's Death Shadow, which is a single black for 13/13. It says it gets -X/-X, where X is your life's total. Then don't play it. Just throw it in your graveyard, wait for Mimeoplasm to come out. You get 13 +1 counters.
Right. Think of all of those big creatures that have big downsides on their text boxes. Take away the text box. Suddenly not an issue.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, this is fun.
Up next we have Massacre Worm. Massacre Worm makes for a great creature by itself. It makes for a wonderful text box, but also it's a 6/5. So you get 12 +1 counters.
Yeah, Massacre Worm fits. I know it's under the big bodies category, but it also fits under the text box category there. So I wouldn't mind Death Shadow's 13 +1/+1 counters on a Massacre Worm.
Oh, yeah, a 19/18.
Yeah, woof.
Yeah, and then on top of that, every time you attack, they have to block with something. And unless their stuff as indestructible, they will be taking 2 life every time.
Right.
Next up, we got Palaka Worm, which has Trample. It's a 7/7,
Yes.
4/7. So the Trample alone makes this text box worth it as a text box creature. But it also says when it enters the battlefield, gain 7 life, and when it dies, you draw a card. So as the Mimeoplasm, it would be great for the text box. It would also be great for the 7 +1 counters. Up next, we got Rotting Regisaur. It's a 3-mana 7/6, which sold. At the beginning of your upkeep, discard a card.
Which is just comical. That's supposed to be the downside.
Right, exactly. In this deck, it's an upside, especially if you get it out on... You could get this out on turn 2. From then on, you just keep discarding creatures. That's it. That helps fuel Mimeoplasm, or if Rotting Regisaur ends up in the graveyard, you got 7 +1/+1 counters you can work with. Yargle, our good old vanilla buddy, gives you 9 +1/+1 counters.
Right, and that's the other thing to keep in mind. You get counters. You get +1/+1 counters for the power of the creature, not +1. It's not you get the 9/3. You're getting the full 9.
Yeah.
So that's very nice.
Removal, nothing too exciting. I'd say except for maybe Steel Hellkite. Steel Hellkite's nice because it can also be your text box. It can also be your +1 counters. I think the biggest downside with Steel Hellkite is that it says X, destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost X, whose controller was dealt combat damage by Steel Hellkite this turn. Activate this ability only once each turn. More often than not, that X is going to be 0. You're going to destroy a bunch of treasures if you play in a treasure-heavy meta. But it's not X or less, and I think that's the biggest downside to that. That's it. That's not a huge downside by any mean.
No. The one that I get a kick out of the list, Run Away Together. I mean, for 1 and a blue, choose 2 target creatures controlled by different players. Return those creatures to their owner's hands. Now, if you're lucky enough and you can find 2 opponents, you want to return both of their creatures, great. More importantly, though, I think this is an easy way to save the Mimeoplasm so that the cost doesn't go through the roof. If the Mimeoplasm gets targeted, is about to die, you can do Run Away Together, return the Mimeoplasm to your hand, so you only have to pay the 5 to put it back out next turn, And you can take one of your opponent's creatures and put it back in their hand as well, because, it doesn't hurt to slow them down a little bit.
For sure.
So, find some creature they've got with counters or that's, fully aura'd up or whatever. Whatever the situation. I love that combination. I love the ability that has. It's giving you a little extra in addition to the removal.
I'm going to talk recursion real quick, and then we'll take it to break.
Right.
But this package here, I mean, you could slot in any. And I think that's kind of a theme with this deck, is that you can, for most of these categories, you can just kind of slot in anything. But the recursion here has a lot of flexibility in terms of, like, a lot of the things are sacrifice a thing, get thing back type of thing. Like Blood for Bones, for instance. You sacrifice a creature, return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, then return another creature card from your graveyard to your hand. That and, say, Victimize. Choose two target creatures in your graveyard. Sacrifice a creature. If you do, return the chosen cards to the battlefield tapped. So, sure, they're both sorceries. They're both... You have to sacrifice a creature, but if, say, like the Massacre Worm, right? Massacre Worm has an ETB. Everything gets -2/-2. Say you want to do that again. Say your opponent has a huge board of 1/1s, elves or otherwise.
Yeah.
And you want Massacre Worm to go into the graveyard so that Mimeoplasm can bring it back out. Both of these cards are helpful for that. That said, you also have Strands of Night, which is just a quality card from, I don't know what block that is. It's a book. Or a set, I guess. What's the book? That's not Odyssey. That's anyway. Strands of Night, black, pay 2 life, sacrifice a swamp, put
Weatherlight.
Target creature. What?
It's from Weatherlight.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Black, pay 2 life, sacrifice a swamp, put target creature card from your graveyard into play. 2 things. Let me hold up the right number of fingers. 2 things. 1, instant speed. 2, it's directly into play. It's not tapped. It's fantastic for, combat shenanigans. It's fantastic for the fact that you could get Sepulchral Primordial out for 2 mana. Sure, it's 2 life in Swamp as well, but, like, overall that means nothing.
Yeah.
But I've got a few more categories I want to talk about when we get back from break. But mostly what I'll save a little bit of a surprise for you guys. We'll be right back. This episode of Temple of False Pod is brought to you by Arixmethes, or Pier, or Rotting Red, or Palakor, or Ochre Jelly, or... Can't really look at it too closely. If you look at it, it changes. I don't know what I'm looking at here. This episode of Temple of False Pod is brought to you by...
Who's to say?
Who's really to say who supports this podcast? It's you. You support this podcast. Thank you.
Who's to say?
Oh, ooze to say?
Yeah.
That's what you said? Man,
yes,
my earbuds are failing me. Ooze to say. And we're back. We're talking about I almost said Ozolith, which is not in this deck because it's in a different deck and I can only afford one. Stop asking. We're talking about the Mimeoplasm. So, like we've been talking about, a lot of these cards, a lot of these creatures especially, have either nice text boxes or big powers or both. And you know what? You know what doesn't have big powers? Hydras and oozes. But they care a lot about counters. What? I don't know why I keep forgetting that word. Hopefully by the end of this episode I'll remember it. So they care a lot about counters, so I have a whole section dedicated to oozes and hydras. More oozes than hydras, but that's because Mimeoplasm's an ooze. Ooze to say. So we got Biogenic Ooze. Creates another ooze. Your end step, you put +1s on all oozes. Feral Hydra. It's a Hydra. Comes in the X +1/+1 counters. You can pay to put +1/+1 counters on it. But so can anybody. Who's going to do it? Just me, I guess. Just me. Who's going to do it? Hero's Bane. Comes in with 4 +1 counters on it. And you can pay to put more counters on it. So you can kind of tell that there's a theme going on here of just kind of being able to put counters on things continually. Voracious Hydra is another fairly flexible one. Comes in with X +1 counters on it, and then you can either double or you can have it fight something. Both valid. Wildwood Scourge. This one seems to be the belle of the ball here for green and an X, as most Hydras are, except for the Voracious one. Comes in with X +1 counters, and then when you put 1 or more +1s on a non-Hydra creature, it gets more. Capiche?
Yes, and you have plenty of creatures that are non-Hydra that will get counters, meaning every ooze.
And honestly, I think, so before the break I kind of had mentioned this, but a lot of this deck is built so that, and I mean, honestly, this might be something I do in the future, but you take, I've got 7, 14, let's say 20 to 25 creatures in this deck that can be easily slotted in and out, right?
Right.
So it would be cool, and I might do this, if I took, got a pile of, let's say, 50 creatures, and then I take out 20 to 25, shuffle them in the deck, and then the next time I play it, I take those out, put different ones in, or shuffle the side deck, and it'd be great.
I can definitely see this deck as a deck that could run as packages.
Yeah, so. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that it can also rely on everybody else's deck. So, of course it's flexible. Of course there is that built-in flexibility where your creatures don't necessarily matter. They're not set in stone. There's probably, 20 cards in this deck that need to be in this deck, and then the other ones can just be whatever you're feeling that day.
Yeah.
There's some counter shenanigans that aren't oozes and hydras. You got Peer, which is just an excellent card. A little pricey, money-wise, but,
I was going to say, I think Peer and Lightning Greaves are the two most expensive cards in the deck. They come in at roughly
10 each.
Around 10 each. So all things considered, the price on this deck is pretty reasonable. So,
yeah.
For those who don't know, Peer is Pure Imaginative Rascal. It's 2 and a green, legendary creature. It's a 1/1. It partners with Toothy, Imaginary Friend. For this deck, not relevant. If 1 or more counters will be put on a permanent your team controls, that many +1 of each of those kinds of counters are put on that permanent instead. So you're getting an extra counter. And whenever you've got a situation where you're adding 1 counter at a time, you're essentially doubling, and that's where Peer really shines.
Yeah, Peer's there for the extra counters. I mean, he's great at that. It is interesting because it's just an additional one. But, with the other things like the oozes and stuff, if you're putting them on incrementally, you're getting extra value.
Yeah.
So if you're going to take out the oozes and hydras, take out Peer. Not worth it. Not worth like you do say Galloping Lizrog with Death Shadows counters, so you get 13. But then with Pier you get 14, and that's very unimpressive.
Right. I mean, Pier is as expensive as it is because Pier also works with Planeswalkers. So when you +1 your Planeswalker, you're actually getting 2 loyalty counters. That's the big reason why Pier costs so much.
I see.
But like I said, if you've got situations like here where your Hydras are adding, where you get to put 1 counter on all your creatures, on each of your creatures, now you're putting 2. You're getting significant benefit there, and that's really where this is where Pier shines. So
yeah, and then you've got Lifecrafter's Gift, which put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, then put +1/+1 counter on each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. So if you go wide, it's great. Or if you just have the 1 creature with +1 counters on it, you get 2 +1s essentially on that 1 creature. But the spicier one is Invigorating Surge for 3 mana, one of which has to be green. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, then double the number of +1/+1 counters on that creature. So say, you come in with a fairly big Mimeoplasm, and they do the math, and they're like, all right, fine, I let it through, no blocks. Bam! You double it. And now they're dead. It's a kill spell.
Even if you're only getting, say, 6 counters on the Mimeoplasm.
Yeah.
Because when you created it. Well, Invigorating Surge puts 1 more, so now you're at 7, and then doubles it. So now you got 14 counters. That doesn't even include its base power and toughness. And if the base power and toughness is even a 2/2. Well, okay, now you're looking at a 16/16, hopefully trample, or some kind of evasion, and you are just walloping somebody. That is vicious.
And it's an instant, which just makes it all the better. So that brings us to win conditions. It's combat, period. I guess I could put in, Simic Ascendancy, where every time you put a counter on something, you also put a counter on Simic Ascendancy, and then if you get, I think it's like 20 counters on Simic Ascendancy at the beginning of your upkeep, you get to win the game.
Right.
I don't have that in here. I guess I could, but I haven't really thought about it. We've got Helix Pinnacle because it's got blue and green in it, because it's generally a Simic with black deck, you're just going to have a lot of extra mana just available, sitting around, doing nothing. So it's got Shroud, which is excellent. And then for X, you can put X tower counters on Helix Pinnacle, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 100 or more tower counters on it, you win the game. I put it in this deck because I had one, and I wanted to see if I could make it work. Haven't played the deck enough since to tell you if I could. So it's staying.
And something to keep in mind: at the end of your opponent's turn, if you have 4 mana to spare, you might as well put it into the Helix Pinnacle.
Yeah. And
get 4 counters. If you have Pier out, you put 1 in. And then
4 activations for 8. That's
4
brilliant.
Activations for 8, not 1 activation and getting 5 because you're a wingnut and didn't think about that. It's 1 per. So just feed it slowly, and you'll get there. Don't you worry.
Sorry I ruined your surprise and I cut you off. I just got so excited. I didn't ever think of that. That's brilliant. Up next, we have Song of Freyalise, which is a common saga from Dominaria. First 2 chapters, your creatures get tap to add 1 mana of any color. Your creatures become birds of paradise. Great. That will help you get Mimeoplasm out. Sure, fine. The 3rd chapter says put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain Vigilance, Trample, and Indestructible until end of turn.
Right.
This is to close out the game. This is to absolutely, like, you've got one opponent left and you just need to push through, and maybe you don't have trample, maybe you're worried about the crackback. You got vigilance, you got indestructible. Nothing matters anymore. Just attack. Up next we have Sir Conrad. Sir Conrad is self-explanatory. You're sending a lot of things to the bin. Sir Conrad says whenever a creature dies, okay, sure. Whenever a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, that's where we're talking.
Yeah.
Or a creature leaves your graveyard, also excellent. It deals 1 damage to each opponent. That's the key here. Each opponent.
Right.
You have so many mill strategies in this deck. He has one on himself for a single black and 1 generic mana. Each player mills 1 card. So every time a creature goes into the bin from that, everybody takes a point.
Right.
Now, say you play Mimeoplasm, and you target 2 things in your graveyard. Those 2 things get exiled, so they leave your graveyard, and everybody takes 2.
Takes 2. Right. Now, you sacrifice the Mimeoplasm to Altar of Dementia.
Yeah.
Okay, well, the Mimeoplasm just left play. That's 1 more. We're now at 3. The Mimeoplasm then mills target player for however many. 12?
Yeah.
So that's 12 cards. How many of those are going to be creatures?
At least a third of them, or about a third of them.
Right.
Probably.
And that's that much more damage dealt out.
And that's to everyone.
Right, and I'm not saying doing that once is your win condition, but it certainly buffs things along and makes stuff like Altar of Dementia just outright scary for your opponents, because
absolutely,
it's just that is a nightmare, you
know. I've got a maybe board tacked onto this, and it's kind of the thing that I was talking about earlier, where like these are just ideas for cards that would work well in here that I didn't have when I built the deck.
Right.
I haven't updated this deck in a while, or at least like given it its proper due. So you got things like the Ancient Dragons that would fit in here. Mostly bronze and silver. Bronze gives +1/+1 counters, which is a thing that you want to do.
Yes.
And silver draws you cards, which you always want to do.
Right.
Apex Altasaur, great text box, big power. It fights things, and then when it takes damage, it fights things, and when it takes damage, it fights things. So, more or less, you stop it when you want to until it takes damage again. And if it's got, 12 +1/+1 counters on it, it's a 22/22. It's going to take a while before it dies. Apex Devastator, Cascade, 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 Cascade. And it's a 10/10. Elder Brain. Now this is a card that I want to try so bad. And I know that if I put it in this deck, it'll be probably 4 games before I find it. I just want to see what this does. That's all I want. It's a 6/6 for 7. So black, 5. Creature type horror. With Menace, which I'll get back to in a sec. Whenever it attacks a player, exile all cards from that player's hand, then they draw that many cards. So it's not all feel bad. It's like a little feel bad because they're probably trying to set up for things. But you just made them, essentially discard their hand. But they're also drawing that many, so good on you. You may play lands and cast spells from among the exile cards for as long as they remain exiled. That does not say as long as Elder Brain is on the battlefield.
Yes.
So those are your cards now. You just drew their hand. And that's every time it attacks. Now, if you cast a spell this way, you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast it. So that just helps all the more.
Right.
If you know that they just drew into something pretty sweet, great. It's yours now.
I will say, our friend Josh actually played this last week in a game of Commander that I was in. And I think you really hit it on the head, Andy, when you said you're essentially drawing the cards.
I think the cool thing with it too is that because it's not drawing, it's not going to your hand because you can't have other people's cards in your hand. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to discard for it.
Right.
Granted, that would be kind of nice with Mimeoplasm as an idea, but like you don't have to worry about, oh my god, I got to get these out now. So I think I think it's neat. It's a 6/6 for 7. In the very least. It's a 6/6 with a cool text box. So big power, cool text box. Great.
And Menace.
And Menace. Right, thank you. I wanted to come back to that.
Yeah, the Menace cannot be underplayed. As you get to the late games, you're gonna be looking at opponents who only have 2 cards or 3 cards left in hand.
Yeah.
And you think to yourself, well, that's not 7 cards. I'm like, yeah, but you know what? They've been hanging on to those cards. Those cards mean something to them. They're special. They're going to do something with those cards. And if you can yank them out of their hands and give them 3 random cards, odds are those 3 new cards are not going to be nearly as good as the ones they had in hand, and you're going to get some good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And honestly, like, I think the biggest thing that this deck lacks is evasion. Throughout this episode, I've been trying to point out when a creature has evasion, which makes it have a cool text box. You've got Sepulchral Primordial. You've got, even Thousand Face Shadow, which I didn't talk about because I don't know if it's a card that works the way I want it to.
Right.
Has flying. You've got a few things that have flying. You got a few things that have trample. You've got a few things that have, menace. And overall, like, that's the thing that you want, because this deck is, for all intents and purposes, a Voltron deck.
Right.
You're putting +1 counters a lot on one creature and attacking with it. So if you don't have trample, if you don't have flying, if you don't have menace, if you don't have intimidate, if you don't have fear, if you don't have, unblockability, like, this deck does fall apart, which is, I mean, I built this deck years ago. I think that would be the first thing that, with another pass on it, would be the thing that sticks out in my mind the most. Is like, this needs that.
Right. So, as somebody who built Griselda Monster Masher, which has a lot of similar requirements. You're looking for creatures in graveyards. You're looking to do this, that, and the other. A couple of things that I would be looking to add or massage into the deck in some way. Now, we mentioned the Ozolith, or as I like to call it for this deck, the Oozolith. Obviously a great card for the deck. Folks, there's some serious money involved with the Oozolith, and I mean dollars. So if you've got it, great. If not, you'll work without it. But more importantly, I was thinking about Rogue's Passage and other ways to make your creature unblockable.
We got Rogue's Passage. We've got Whisper Silk Cloak. None of which are in this deck. Actually, Rogue's Passage isn't even in this deck. Amazing.
So you want to have some ways to do this, and I mean, you're running blue. You're honestly, what is it? Invisible Stalker. I think it's a 1/1, and it just says that it's
no relation.
Exactly, but it says that it's unblockable. So you've got a 1/1 unblockable. You're going to put 6 +1/+1 counters on it. So now you've got a 7/7 unblockable.
Yeah,
it's not super exciting. The text box isn't amazing, but it does kind of what you want it to do. The other thing that you want to keep in mind when looking at other creatures to insert in and out of the deck, find creatures with haste. There is nothing worse than putting together a big juicy creature, or in your case, a Mimeoplasm with a pile of +1/+1 counters and a really cool ability, and then having to wait. I know you've got the Greaves in here, and I know that I believe there are other ways that you can make things hasty, but man, too many times with Grusilda, I would spend the 5 to put two creatures together only to see it get killed at some point in the course of the turn because everybody gets a chance to take it out. And it was just, it was very frustrating watching that happen and knowing that you're just burning turns because your creatures just don't have haste. So,
which I mean, with Griselda's is a little easier. It got red. Yes. I agree. With blue, you have ways to give things flying or unblockability. With green, you have ways to give things trample. Some additions that I would probably put myself into these decks. You've got Kodama the West Tree, which says modified creatures you control have trample. So equipment, auras you control are counters or modifications. Great. And then Garrick's Uprising just says creatures you control have trample. There's a few of those there's a few that are also creatures that just say creatures you control have trample.
Right.
Excellent. Anything that gives other things trample is always good in my book, especially if you're playing multiple creatures. That kind of rounds out my deck. I mean, as you can see, there's a lot of, like I've said, there's a lot of area where you can just slot things in, take things out. It's an easy deck to modify to be your own. It's an easy deck to you get bored of a certain card, take it out, put something just dumb and big in it. And I think that I think Magic. I mean, I think Wizards kind of peaked early with this commander design, but it can do broken things. I am aware of that. I don't want to do that. I want to do dumb things. I want to do silly things. I want to laugh at myself.
Right.
Which is also kind of why there isn't a terrible amount of evasion in here.
Right. You add a Rogue's Passage and then suddenly, it's how big?
Yeah, right?
Oh, so I'm dead.
Yeah.
I'm just dead because that's commander damage in one hit kind of thing.
It's an easy deck to probably break, but I really like just, with every preview season, just seeing what dumb big thing could possibly go in this deck.
Right.
And yeah, it's just silly is what it is. And I hope to play it again soon, honestly.
Yeah.
I finally finished cataloging all my cards. And I finally finished breaking down most of my decks. I broke down. I had 12 decks to begin with. When I started, when I moved, and I broke down half of them. I still have 6 left because some of them were fairly new when I moved. So I never really got to play them much. I've got my Kazur and Ukima deck. I've got my Vazi deck, which is kind of starting to get old. But I've got this because through putting this deck into Architect, I was like, oh, this just brings a smile on my face. I just want to do stupid stuff.
Right.
I mean, obviously, too, the heads I win, tails you lose Secret Lair deck that I have sleeved up, waiting to play one day. Because that finally came, but
looking forward to it.
Yeah, I don't know. I could talk about this deck all day. It seems like I have. Is there anything else that you want to talk about with this deck?
Not particularly. It just, I sort of talked about some of the spots where I thought it was open, and again, I really like the idea of the package. I like the idea of the deck constantly being fresh because, as soon as you get a little bit bored, you snatch out a half a dozen cards and slot in a half a dozen new cards, and then the deck is going to play just that little bit differently, or at least it'll be acting differently. Because I know that I can get the same thing with Griselda. With Griselda, pull out a handful of cards and you put in a bunch of other cards, and away you go. It's and the deck plays very differently than it did otherwise. So. I think this is this looks like a lot of fun, and can't wait to see you get a few more games with it under your belt.
Yeah, I can't wait. So that's gonna do it for us this week at Temple of Falspod, where decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. This was episode 99. Next week is episode 100, Bruce.
99, baby.
And, for all our listeners out there, we got, something exciting planned. Surely. And hopefully it'll come together before we have to release it. So, either we'll have a deck building challenge, which I will chime in right here. Or we'll have our special plan enacted. And we'll see you next week. March is almost over. March will almost be over by the time we see you next week. I'll say it again. We're Temple of Falspod. We're decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
That's Bruce. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, we're on YouTube, and I think next season will also still be on YouTube. So we'll see you next week. Thank you so much. Wow, I'm just going to talk in circles today.
Yeah.
Play some Magic for me. Have a great night. And may your fifth land be the temple.
Bye!
Wait. Before you go, I just wanted to say thank you for listening. You can reach out to us via email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com or on Twitter @falsepodmtg. Bruce is @manaburned, and I'm @AndyWeekend, though you'll definitely notice I use the podcast Twitter far more often. Now that we've got you here, make sure you subscribe, rate us on whatever podcast platform you use. It helps us out. It gets us more reach. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. Like a video there. Leave some comments for more casual enjoyment. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with some more timeless discussions about all things casual. So come hang out, and may your fifth land be the temple. Bye-bye. Should I do my best, Bruce? Bye!